Hey guys, I'm Chatilla van Grinsven, call me Chat. This is the first ever episode of the Chat Talk, and today's guest is Marc Bekoff. He is the co-founder of the Ethologist of the Ethical Treatment of Animals together with Jane Goodall. He's an author, biologist, and professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. Please enjoy the show, and if you like this video, please subscribe. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing, what you've been researching, what your work is, and your background?
Well, I taught at the University of Colorado in Boulder for many, many years, and my primary research is in the field called the ethology, which really has its roots in the Netherlands and in Austria and in Germany with people like Nico Tinbergen, for example, really famous biologists. Field-oriented, but I've always been really interested in the field called cognitive ethology. It's the study of animal minds, how they work and what's in them. And then my main focus has been on animal emotions.
Wow.
Sentience, what they're feeling. I mean, that, yes, non-humans are conscious and feeling beings.
Wow. And that has not been recognized yet by many.
Well, it's changing greatly. I think more and more people are recognizing it, but they're not necessarily doing anything about it. So they become what we would say, they're apologists. They'll say, well, I know, pigs suffer, but I like my bacon, or I know cows suffer, but I like my hamburger. And it's a hard road to travel to get them to change, but I also really believe that more and more people are changing, but there's still a very small number of people who have adopted, if you will, a plant-based diet. But one thing I do is I ask people to think about their dogs, or cats if they live with companion animals. Would you do it to your dog? Would you put your dog on a factory farm? Because when I worked in China, people would say to me, how could you go to China? People eat dogs and cats there. And I say, well, I just left the United States where people eat cows and pigs and chickens and, other sentient beings.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a conditioning of the mind at the end of the day. It's like cultured conditioning.
No, exactly. That's what it is. And, not making people feel badly for what they do, because that doesn't win you any argument. But I think more and more people are really becoming more sensitive to the fact that we just can't continue living in this world with this dominating, controlling, violent. I mean, it's a violent and abusive view we have of non-human animals, and going from say, more carnivore-based or more meat-based to plant-based will also get rid of sexual abuse among animals, that's directed to animals. I know people get really upset when you talk about that, but if you look at what happens to a dairy cow, if you look at what happens to other animals, especially the females who are forced to breed, like on puppy mills, until they're done, and then they're killed usually because they're no longer reproduction machines or breeding machines. And I know people get very uncomfortable when you talk like that, but that's what happens. Yeah. And so I always say to people, if you don't want to add to the violence and abuse in the world, then begin changing your diet right now. And when people ask me, I remember the first time I said this was actually at a meeting in the Netherlands where people were asking me, how can we make a difference? I said, right after my talk, you can make a difference by choosing a different meal plan. I mean, literally, you don't have to found an organization, or, you don't have to be a famous person. And
everybody has a choice. And, at the end of the day, when we go to the grocery store, we vote. We vote with our wallet at the end of the day.
Yes.
Do we buy meat or do we buy plant-based meat if you still would like to have some sort of, meatable piece on your plate? So, and there are so many choices these days.
Yeah. Well, another way I get people to think about it is it's not what we eat, but who we eat.
Yeah.
And years ago, I had 5 women in Vienna write me an email about a year after I gave a talk in Vienna saying that they all went vegetarian or vegan because it wasn't what's for dinner, it's who's for dinner. Because the animals people are eating used to be sentient animals. They're not what's, they're not its, they're not whiches. It's the dog who did something, the cow who did something, the pig whose life we had really, affected negatively. And so I say that a lot, and for some people it goes over their head because anything with any intellect goes over their head. But for a lot of people, they'll just simply say, well, that's really interesting. It's who's for dinner.
Yeah.
And the other thing I do is, when people talk about bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches, there was that movie Babe with the pig. And I'll say, well, it's not a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. It's a Babe lettuce and tomato sandwich. The other thing that I tell people, because I traveled so much for years, they'll say, well, it's really hard to be plant-based, especially if you travel. And I'll go, why? You can eat vegetables, you can eat pasta, you can eat pizza without cheese.
Vegan cheese? Come on.
There's vegan cheese if you want it. I don't particularly like it and I don't eat it, but
I love it.
What's that?
I love vegan cheese.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Most Europeans I know, because of the cheese tradition, like Gouda and stuff.
Yes.
But you're right. There's no shortage of options. Right now in Boulder, when I went shopping last week, right after the pandemic was announced, most of the products in the frozen section and in, say, the refrigerated section, most of the products that had disappeared off the shelf were vegetarian and vegan.
Wow.
And I asked somebody who works at the store, and they couldn't answer it other than that, early on, it was a rumor, but then it was substantiated that the cause of what's going on came from a wet market in China. And I figure, people are saying, well, because I'm such an optimist, I think some good will come out of it. Well, it's here now. It's a fact of life. And so if some good could come out of it, it would be realizing that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. In the future, we're going to see many more pandemics like this. I always say I'm an optimist, not a pessimist. But I really think that pandemics like this or global situations can really help the plant-based movement along. It really can, the dairy-free movement along, because a lot of people have no idea, once again, of who they're eating and what's been inside of them. They eat a burger, they eat a piece of bacon, and really what you're eating is everything that individual animal was and had in him or her. I think it was Aristotle, the philosopher, could have been Plato, but I think it was Aristotle who, whenever he lived thousands of years ago, said that when you're eating other animals, you're eating their emotions, if you will. You're eating their stress. And I don't really know the science behind that. People say eating fewer animal products or animals and animal products will make you less violent. I don't know if that's true or not. But when you're eating non-human animals or you're eating non-human animal products, you are consuming violence. Yeah. You're consuming their stress.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that in the future, people will do the studies that are necessary, to show that. And then, of course, you've got that phenomenon called the link, which is the link between violence to humans and violence to non-humans and violence to humans. Yeah. And, people go, well, it's not a perfect correlation. No, nothing's really a perfect correlation. A few things are. But, once again, if you look at the history of sociopaths and serial killers, in many, it began as violence to animals. And industrial agriculture, and even agriculture on these compassionate so-called home farms has an element of violence to it. So you're raising an animal who you love, and then you're killing them for your food, which you don't really need. And it's a double cross. And that's why I always come back to dogs and saying, well, if you wouldn't do it to a dog, why would you allow it to be done to a cow or a pig, for example? I know the word sustainable is used and abused, but if we don't change our ways now, we're doomed for the future. We really are, and I'm an optimist. But if we don't change our ways now, future generations, when current generations are no longer around, future generations are going to have a very different life, and it's going to be I believe it's going to be a much lower quality, less empathic, less compassionate life, and people are going to be more robotic, really utilitarian. I want this, and if it means that you suffer, too bad. And that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's frightening.
Sure. Sustainability is the goal, and sustainability should always come with compassion at the end of the day.
Yes.
With animals and humans.
Oh, I like that. Sustainability should only come with compassion.
Yes.
I will quote you.